In June 1984, we packed our bags, bid goodbye to Casper, and moved to London on a corporate transfer. While we negotiated purchase of a house, the company installed us in a flat on the top floor of a building on Audley Street in the fashionable Mayfair district, not far from the American Embassy in Hyde Park. I could never have afforded these accommodations on my own. Neighbors in the 3 floors below included an Arabian sheikh with 3 wives, and Donald Sutherland, whose gold Rolls Royce collected daily sheaves of parking tickets. This was a few years before the introduction of the dreaded London wheel clamp. Looking forward to our purchase of an automobile with steering wheel on the right, my wife and I booked driving lessons from an agency on Portman Street, a few doors down from a blue historical plaque proclaiming, "Benedict Arnold, American patriot, died here in 1801. You know, it's funny how perspectives change from one side of the Atlantic to the other. Our driving instructor was John Hardcastle, a name befitting his personality, a short, compact, 30-something East Ender with a hint of Cockney who relished his position of authority. My weekly lessons commenced after work around 5:30, coinciding with peak London traffic. Now, this is not as intimidating as it sounds. First of all, hardly anyone drove to work, public transportation being abundant, and parking spaces virtually non-existent. And according to a statistician with lots of time on her hand, London daytime traffic in 1984 averaged 7 miles per hour, about the same as in 1790. So, except for the few times I turned into oncoming traffic, lessons were pretty tame. In September, we occupied our new house in the town of Northwood, about 15 miles northwest of London. Northwood's claim to fame is being next door to the village of Pinner, birthplace of Elton John. The nearby Watford Town Museum displays one of his flamboyant outfits, not to be confused with replicas of 16th century court garments. Our house was advertised as having a 2-car garage, and indeed it did if you parked one car behind the other, or one car in front of the other. Either way, it was a 2-car garage. In 1984, Northwood had retained vestiges of village life. The milkman delivered to the front door, doctors made house calls, family took walks together on Sundays, and Mr. Andrews, the local police constable, made his rounds on a bicycle and accepted invitations to drop in for a cup of tea. Our modest plot shared a piece of history, located on what had once been the estate of Sir Thomas More, a one-time favorite of King Henry VIII until he wasn't, before being beheaded in 1535. The only sign of Thomas's presence on our property were a pair of giant registered oak trees reportedly planted at his behest. By registered, I mean that pruning would not be done without application to the town council, a process requiring months. After being repeatedly whacked by a low-hanging branch, thicker than a broken handle, I waited for a dark night. Took an axe, and with one blow, eliminated the problem. I'm sure King Henry would have approved because he locked things off. And I trust that the statute of limitations applies. Having at last acquired house and garage, we bought a car, a 1984 Volt station wagon with manual shift. Thanks to the administrations of John Hardcastle, my wife and I were fairly competent drivers, really turning heading on into oncoming traffic. And when we did, learning to recognize the English 2-figured counterpart of the American flip-off. Always in the back of our minds was the prospect of having to take the dreaded British driving test in order to be legally licensed, although it was generally agreed that authorities would accept the American version for the first year of residence. So we made an appointment to take the test in the nearby town of West Ruislip, of necessity booking several months in advance because test slots were hard to come by. Driving standards are universal throughout the United Kingdom. There's no written test. Everything is done behind the wheel. Half of all applicants fail the driving test, and 2/3 of first-time applicants fail, all having to wait several months to retest. As a result, passing the driver's test is considered such a big deal that Hallmark created congratulatory greeting cards. The letter L, hanging in jest from the back of Prince Andrew's and Sarah Ferguson's wedding carriage, stood for, quote, learner, unquote. A sign indicating student driver. Apparently they did not learn well. I took my driving test in the spring of 1985. Once issued, the license is good for a lifetime without need for renewal. Lifetime defined by age 70, which made me worry a little bit. On the appointed day, I parked in one of the, quote, learner, unquote, slots in front of the licensing authority. Inside the waiting room, beneath institutional fluorescent lights, sat 5 applicants, some accompanied by their driving instructors who whispered words of encouragement. I chose not to invite Hardcastle. To say that the Ministry of Transport's driving test is an adult puberty right is an exaggeration. Almost anxiety hung in the air. We worried like patients in a dentist's waiting room, over which hung a sign, "We are temporarily out of Novocaine. Sorry for the inconvenience." No, that's not a good analogy. Better one is, the executioner is indisposed today. Our intern will be performing the duties. Have a nice day. On the stroke of 2 p.m., in marched 6 dour examiners, each with a clipboard. There was no small talk. We went, for want of a remembered name, I'll refer to my examiner as Mr. Harder-Castle, a middle-aged man wearing the kind of no-nonsense, thick-rimmed glasses issued by the National Health. To level the playing field during the test drive, carefully scripted instructions are the same, uttered in England, Scotland, or Wales. I was quaking in my boots, and it showed. The first hurdle was the eye test. "Mr. Brown, please read the license number on the car parked in front of you." My God, that car was 100 feet down the road. As I squinted and sought desperately to read the number, Harder-Castle replied without changing intonation, "Mr. Brown, please read the license number on the car parked in front of you." I realized that I had been looking down the opposite side of the street instead of the subject car, only 20 feet distance. On a basis of per miles driven, you're 3 times more likely to be killed in an American road than on a British one. I suspect the reason is that British driving test standards are uniform and tough, with emphasis on observation. A British test examiner watches your eyes. Rear-view mirrors must be consulted every few seconds and always before signaling or braking. And it goes without saying that eyes must sweep left and right when passing through an intersection. When an examiner asks, "What is the color of the car behind you?" the answer must be instantaneous and correct. When the examiner slaps his clipboard on the dash. The car must be brought in a controlled emergency stop without skidding. Steering with one hand or crossing the arms when steering around the corner are grounds for disqualification. Hands must be at all time manipulate the lower half of the steering wheel, accomplished by feeding the wheel through palms, kind of like reading a ticker tape in the old days. This is called, quote, control, unquote. Likewise, changing gears while turning a corner is a no-no, as only one hand would be on the wheel. Knees don't count. There are two tests of dexterity. The first consists of backing the car around a 90-degree curve without touching the curb, while being no more than a foot from it. The other test is called a three-point turn, basically turning the car around when the street is too narrow to do a U-E. The precision required for these maneuvers is akin to the compulsory figures of an Olympic skating competition. Stopping in the middle of the block, ARTCORE said, "Mr. Brown, please perform a three-point turn." However, I was determined to back around the curve with such unfathomable reason. It was 200 feet difference. 200 feet away. I don't remember having to back around the curve that distance. As I started to reverse, ARTCORE repeated, "Mr. Brown, please perform a three-point turn." Same intonation, though I respect the examiner was thinking, "You idiot, this is the second time you failed to follow instructions." Throughout my ordeal, ARTCORE periodically made marks on his clipboard, in my opinion, with unnecessary flourish. Having eventually navigated several roundabouts, exercised vigilance at pedestrian crossings, and performed the three-point and curve maneuvers in the correct way, I found myself back at the examiner's parking lot. ARTCORE asked 5 or 6 perfunctory questions about vehicle maintenance rules of the road, mercifully concluding the test. I knew I had failed. After consulting the clipboard for what seemed like an eternity, ARTCORE scrawled something and announced without inflection, but with the hint of a sigh, "Mr. Brown, you have met the qualifications for a British driver's license." Congratulations was evidently not in his script. I learned later that examiners love to flunk cocky American drivers. Evidently, my nervousness was a plus. A week later, my wife passed her test, thus ensuring domestic tranquility. As ARTCORE handed me a voucher entitled me to drive on Her Majesty's highway for the next 26 years, a car pulled up behind and an attractive young lady emerged to leap into the arms of her waiting driver instructor, screaming, "I passed!" Would this display of poor joy soften ARTCORE? Would he reveal a shard of human emotion? Would ARTCORE exclaim, "Lucky bloke," or perhaps, "I'm on the wrong end of this profession"? Would a softer Castle emerge? Would he go home to Mrs. ARTCORE, tussle the heads of his little parapets, and relate the following touching drama he had witnessed? I don't think so. ARTCORE simply muttered, "Now, what was that all about?" Thank you.